Finally, everybody, lawmakers in the Senate have finally reached a deal on more crisis relief funding, and Chuck Schumer has announced that the beginning of the Build Back Better bill is now being signed into law. It's now their top priority for the Democrats. As I said, finally Congress is taking action on the fourth stimulus check and trying their very best to help out the people in need. And this is something that everybody wanted to see. And it's going to help so many people across the country. So according to 4 people familiar with an agreement, the Senate negotiators struck a deal on $10 billion in crisis relief aid, setting the chamber on a potential course to clear the bill this week. That's some awesome news. Negotiations have been going on for months now, and the compromise is going to reprogram billions of dollars in unused money from other crisis relief bills to deliver funding for more stimulus relief programs. Now, the legislation does not include global crisis aid sought by Democrats and a handful of Republicans, which could become a sticking point when the package comes before the House of Representatives. Senators have received a preliminary budget score from the Congressional Budget Office. It paves the way for the deal to be publicly announced as soon as today. And Senate Democrat Chris from Delaware and Chuck Schumer presented and pressed negotiators to include $1 billion in global crisis stimulus aid, after lawmakers shaved down the package last week from $15.6 billion to $10 billion, zeroing out what had been $5 billion in the crisis global aid. Stimulus aid, everybody, is definitely here, and I think President Biden should definitely send out more stimulus checks before it gets too late. And if you guys agree with me, then tell me in the comments down below. So as the federal government continues to work on the fourth stimulus bill, many states have actually stepped up to send residents a fourth check in 2022. According to Yahoo News, millions of people will benefit from these new payments this year. A stimulus fund worth over $2 billion called the Excluded Workers Fund has been approved to help workers who are unable to collect previous federal stimulus checks. Yahoo News also says that money has been paid out to those within that category, earning and who earned less than $26,000 in 2020. Plus, this program is being expanded in 2022. Plus, the New York governor, Katie Hochul, announced that more than $64 million in federal funding will be used to provide one-time payments to struggling New Yorkers, including those with children or living in multi-generational households, to help with their expenses amid the ongoing crisis. So the one-time payments are earmarked to help with the cost of diapers for struggling families, food expenses or households with both children and older adults, and provide housing and relocation assistance. The New York governor said in a statement the crisis inequities that exist across society, leaving vulnerable New Yorkers who are already struggling even further behind. Families will receive $140 per eligible child to assist with the cost of diapers, with the funding participated to serve roughly 150,000 children in 128,000 households statewide. This will cover food costs, and the agency is going to issue one-time payments in April of $730 through SNAP benefits. What are your thoughts on this, everybody? Do you trust our Democrats and Republicans in Congress? Can they get the job done this year?
Minute to the distinguished House Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer of Maryland.
The gentleman is recognized. Thank the gentlelady for yielding. And I would respond, this bill is about economic resilience. You can't be independent if you go bankrupt. You can't be independent if you can't operate your business. I've gone into restaurant after restaurant in my district, and the owners of those restaurants have had thanks for me, for the Congress, and yes, for the administration, including Donald Trump, who signed many of these bills. That at a time of extraordinary stress, through no fault of their own, but a pandemic that attacked all of us, they were able to keep their heads above water, pay their employees, even if they couldn't be open, transfer to carry out, and do so many things that they were able to do to remain viable, which is, by the way, why almost every state has a surplus. Why? Because revenues did not fall as they were projected to fall. That is true in my state. I think it's true in almost every state. Why didn't revenues fall? Because we kept people above water. Now, in this particular program that passed, in many respects, with bipartisan support in 2020 and in 2020, but in December of 2020 as well, there were some 250,000 plus who were eligible under the rules that we drafted and passed, but only about 100,000 of them got relief, which means that we left behind 150,000 people who were eligible under the rules that we set. And now, some would say to those that were left behind, you're on your own. That's not what we're going to do today. We're not going to tell them you're on your own. We're going to tell them we understand how important you are to the life of our country, to the economy of our country.
Tax credit to help more Americans struggling financially during the crisis. And with President Biden changing it up last year under the American Rescue Plan, it is a change that is now permanent. The Earned Income Tax Credit has historically existed as a tax break for low to moderate income workers, with credits ranging between $560 and around $6,935 for 2022. The exact amount someone receives will depend on their income and filing status. Until this year, having children was an additional qualifier. The American Rescue Plan introduced a temporary lift on the child requirement, roughly tripling the maximum credit for childless workers from $538 to around $1,500 last year. The income eligibility requirement still depends on how many children a given filer has. Until this year, having children was an additional qualifier. The American Rescue Plan introduced a temporary lift on the child requirement, roughly tripling the maximum credit for childless workers from $538 to around $1,500 last year. And the less one earns, the greater the earned income tax credit, because it's a refundable tax credit. Lower income taxpayers who have little to no income tax liability can receive the total amount of the credit as a tax refund anyway. Now let's go over the status of the fourth stimulus check. Well, I know that there are many Americans that are anxiously waiting for Congress to send out stimulus payments to help during the crisis. Lawmakers have already shown their support for sending out more relief checks, and the first stimulus check was an amount for $1,200, and the second was around $600. With each check, there were various qualifying limits. According to many experts, a fourth stimulus check's amount will be similar to the past three rounds of payments. Members of the House Ways and Means Committee wrote a letter to President Biden urging him to include recurring direct checks in his American Families Plan. The White House has reported that lawmakers in Congress will just continue to negotiate on the next stimulus package.